Most expensive video game failures of all time. Game ranks.
You've heard this before, but video games cost a lot of time and money to make. Sometimes that results in smash hits and millions and billions of dollars, and other times it ends up being a massive failure. Today, we're talking about some of those failures.
Let's
10
see
of
it.
the most expensive video game failures, or at least perceived failures. Now, take all these estimated budgets that are going to pop up with a grain of salt. Anyway, enough disclaimers. Let's get started off with number 10.
Number 10.
The original Shenmue, believe it or not. Yes, this game is an absolute
I remember that
classic,
game.
and a lot of
Played a
people
little
are
bit
in
of
love
it.
with it for a reason. When this released, there was nothing else like this. The character was appealing, his quest was appealing, but just kind of walking around and engaging in life felt really novel and charming at the time. Plus, you could, kick some ass sometimes. Now, from what is floating around out there, the estimated production and marketing cost is anywhere from 47 to 70 million US dollars, which apparently also covered some of Shenmue 2. It's not totally clear, but we do know that Shenmue, the original game, sold 1.2 million, but apparently didn't recoup its development costs. So that technically means that the game was not a massive win for them. And it's interesting, right? Because this was an all-time classic game. Like I said, a lot of people love it. I think Shenmue 2 was better, but it doesn't matter. It got fans in the door, and people are still begging for new games to this day. So it's an all-time classic, but the budget was completely unheard of at the time. In 2001, it was the most expensive game ever made at that point, we believe. And yes, here it wasn't able to make its money.
It didn't do that well. That
Next,
sucks.
over number 9, we have Too Human. Now, I know we've been bringing up this game a lot recently.
Too Human.
And a lot of that is because
I remember that game.
The failure. Too Human
Really?
was seemingly an expensive disaster by many metrics. So we know it has an estimated budget of around 60 to 100 million dollars. But there's so much more in between that. I mean, the fact that the game had development deal exclusivity stuff on multiple consoles, both a PlayStation console and the Nintendo GameCube, but ultimately all that kept falling out, and we ended up getting the game on Xbox 360. This 2008 game was developer Silicon Knights' next big thing. A lot of people were hoping, seemingly internally as well, that this was going to become a franchise, because it did have a unique spin. It was like sci-fi Norse mythology, and it could have been absolutely awesome. Unfortunately, when it released, it just wasn't very memorable, it wasn't great, and just didn't really have a lot of stakes.
I remember it. What do you mean?
There, on that statue, they aren't shadows.
It's been a long time
Technically,
since
it's
I
important
played
to
it.
note that the creation of this game spanned from 1999 to 2008. That alone just sounds massively expensive. Along with that, a few years later, a whole court case cropped up where Silicon Knights tried to sue Epic for failure to deliver on what the Epic Games Unreal Engine at the time could really do. It resulted in obviously massive court fees and the cost of paying lawyers and all that, and resulted in Silicon Knights' downfall.
Wow, that sucks. Did they win the lawsuit though?
Next, over number
That's
8,
what I was wondering.
APB, All Points Bulletin. This game
Oh,
was
I heard
billed
about
as
this.
the big multiplayer Grand Theft Auto.
I remember when this
Before
first came out, I was
Rockstar
like,
got
come on,
around to
dude.
it. APB was absolutely hyped up, and it was
hyped
a
up.
massive production with an estimated $100 million budget.
Holy
Again,
crap.
we're getting this from Wikipedia, but either way, the number doesn't really matter. The point is that this game was massively expensive. I mean, think about it. All the networking infrastructure, the building of a whole open world.
I played this game for all of
getting that
2
online,
seconds.
Dealing with characters, crime, players having
I think
freedom.
I rented it
so
from
much to it. And when the game released,
what was that place
it
we used to
really
rent
didn't
games
take
from
off like they were
before?
hoping. It's still has some
Blockbuster,
dedicated
right?
fans to this day.
I rented it from a
but
Blockbuster.
It was nowhere near seemingly what it cost to really make it, especially with the fact that eventually Rockstar would do
Alright,
with
bought it at
Grand Theft
GameStop.
Auto Online, seemingly
Played it for a little bit
there's
and
not
then
really a lot of room
refunded
for anything
it.
else there. But what really
One
was
of
the
the two.
icing on the cake, or what really made it feel like a financial failure, is when K2 Network purchased the game for a mere 1.5 million pounds in 2010. So even though the game did manage to live on in some ways here and there, that did feel like a massive L from the very lofty goals this game originally set out with. Next, over at number 7, we have something from THQ. Now, THQ was one of the heavyweight game publishers, developers for a long time. But when that OG THQ had a miss, it was usually a massive miss because they would swing hard. Take the UDraw tablet. This tablet with a stylus kind of peripheral did start out as a device for the Wii, which I guess is where it made the most sense, but ultimately also ended up becoming something for the PS3 and Xbox 360 in 2011. And yeah, I mean, what even is this thing? Like, what is the point of this thing? I was heavily invested and deep in the video game world and the gaming news world back then, and I don't even remember.
I don't remember this at all.
I think that says a lot. You probably don't either if you're as old as me. This expanded release was considered a disaster. It apparently caused a revenue shortfall of around $100 million.
Yeah, it sounds about right.
Admitted it. The CFO admitted it on a financial earnings call, and he said that they had like 1.4 million unsold units that were just like sitting in a factory somewhere, sitting in a warehouse. Nobody wanted this thing, ending up with a massive like $100 million L. This is insane. And apparently, according to Eurogamer, the former company president actually blames this UDraw thing as one of the massive mistakes which eventually did lead to THQ's demise. Obviously, THQ ended up kind of being packaged up, bought, and rebranded into a different thing.
THQ Nordic.
Modern gaming history, but the old THQ, as we knew it, fell flat on its face at one point, and I bet one of those trips to lead to that fall was definitely this UDraw thing. Again, I barely even know what this thing is. It's so stupid. Look at it. Next, over at number 6, we have the more recent Immortals of Avum from last year, 2023. This one sucks because it's something
Immortals,
I love, right?
Wow.
It's not a remake.
I haven't played it yet, so I don't know.
It's its own completely new adventure. It's new world, new characters, and it is a single player, fairly linear.
Apparently this didn't do too well last.
Game. It is pure distilled video game fun, and I really enjoyed this game. It is far from perfect. It may not be the most memorable game in the world, but it was a lot of fun, and it was a little different, and that's what we want at this point, right? Well, according to sources, the game's development cost around $85 million, and then EA, through EA Originals, apparently spent $40 million on marketing and distribution. So you can chalk that up to $125 million total. Obviously, it gets a little more complicated with like how EA Originals works and how it's actually pretty generous to the developer, like in the developer's favor, but still, it wasn't enough. It just feels like this game was given no chance. It released amidst so many other heavy hitters.
I was gonna say, yeah.
You know, 2023 was a year stacked full of top tier 10 out of 10 game releases. Like Baldur's Gate 3 was around that time, so it was a really tough going for Immortals of Avum. And ultimately, the studio that's set up to create this game and this whole new thing ended up shutting down after this.
Oh no!
After sales, it laid off about 45% of the staff, and then in April 2024, the rest of the staff was placed on furlough. So it's unfortunate because they really tried with this one. Sometimes it just doesn't work out, and sometimes when it doesn't work out, it can be kind of expensive. Next, over at number 5, we're switching gears here for a sec with Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within. This is not a mainline Final Fantasy game. This is actually a feature film, a computer animated full-length film from 2001 that I'm gonna totally admit I absolutely loved. It had heavy hitter stars like Steve Buscemi and Alec Baldwin in it, and it was absolutely crazy. Is it goofy? Is it very early 2000s? Yes. Does it really carry a lot of the philosophies of the Final Fantasy games? No, not really. But it sure was something. I don't know. Maybe it's nostalgia. But according to sources, it was $137 million to make, which is equivalent to $214 million in today's money, and apparently only grossed $85 million in box office. This was considered a box office bomb by all means. I mean, they really went big on this one. It had TV commercials, it had fancy posters. Again, it had a lot of famous actors in it, all that press, all that stuff. And
don't remember this one either.
Totally bombed. It was actually blamed for the demise of Square Pictures, which was set up to like be a thing, a new endeavor, and it apparently nearly ruined the entire company. Next, down at number 4, we have Marvel's Avengers. This was the big, expensive live service Avengers game. It was like the first big Marvel game that would create these heroes and give us fun new versions of them, and it was designed to keep us playing endlessly. It was one of those games. It actually had a pretty cool campaign with some decent story, but the game did the live service thing of something like a Destiny or the Division or whatever, where it's designed to keep you playing and looting and doing multiplayer shenanigans with your friends as Thor and Iron Man or whoever. Unfortunately, even though this one did find a small dedicated audience, unfortunately it didn't quite land. It was estimated between $170 to $200 million to make this thing. Obviously, the Avengers, Marvel superheroes, that's a big thing, and that comes with a big price tag. What we do know is that Square Enix estimated a $63 million loss the year the game came out. Now, I know Square Enix is famous for all of their games essentially underperforming. They have extremely high expectations of all their games, but Avengers felt like it hit different. There was a lot of press, there was a lot of backlash to this one. A lot of people
I was
totally
excited
dunking
about
on
this.
it, and part of that was justified by looking at the player counts. Like, not enough people were playing.
And when
this
I played it, I was
massive,
like, yikes.
expensive game to really keep it going. It did get all of its expansions, it did do some stuff, and it did get better, but it definitely felt like it ended up wrapping up, you know, really closing its doors way earlier than it could have. Or really way earlier than the publishers wanted, that's for sure. Eventually, before shutting it down, they ended up giving away everything in the game for free for people, and then that was it. Add it to the pile of live service game failings. So many studios try to chase that dragon, try and get a piece of that pie, but ultimately end up totally flopping, and sometimes, with Marvel's Avengers, it's really freaking expensive. Now down at number 3, we have Skull and Bones. Skull and Bones is Ubisoft's open
another
world
one.
multiplayer
Jesus.
pirate game that has been in the works for what feels like almost a decade.
It was all right.
there
It wasn't
leads
too
to
bad.
A cost ballooning. If you have multiple studios, tons of people working on this thing for years and years and years, that cost is just going to keep going up. And the project reportedly cost Ubisoft $200 million.
$200 million.
We don't know for
Yeah, that sounds
sure,
about
but
right.
that's where it's at. And like just within a couple of weeks after its release, a news report broke that the game reportedly sold less than 1 million copies after release, making it a massive financial flop for Ubisoft. Now, we do know just recently they did announce
they
new
did the
content
Chorus
for
of
it,
Havoc.
so
That looks
maybe it'll
pretty
get a
good.
second lease on life.
It does look
Ubisoft
all
tends
right.
to support some of their live service games and then they turn it around. I don't know though, like with other games, like there's been some excitement around them. With Skull and Bones, it really felt like a lot of people did not care, so I think it's a tougher battle. And it's a damn shame because pirates are cool and we always need more pirate games, but Skull and Bones just feels like it's not quite landing with people. Again, this is an early one, the story is still going, we only know so much about what really went on behind the scenes here and whether or not the game is eventually going to die and be totally considered a failure. We've seen
The
crazier
loading
turnarounds. I
screens,
don't know about this
bro.
one, but I just wanted to mention.
Deuce.
Now down at number 2, we have Suicide
loading
Squad Kill
screen.
the Justice League. This is another
Yeah.
recent one.
I'm
of the
still
most
gonna play it.
recent dead bodies on the pile of live service dead bodies at this point. This one might be one of the more expensive ones, with Warner Brothers stating recently that they took a $200 million loss on this game. God
Jesus.
damn. And that's not something that's going to slowly recoup.
That's
either,
a
right?
lot of
Because
money.
The player counts are low, the interest is low. The game
$200
really
million
can't rise,
loss
and
on
it doesn't really seem
Suicide
like they're
Squad
releasing
Kill the Justice
too much
League.
exciting content for it. With it being a live service game, the idea is that, you know, new stuff gets added, the game gets better, more
I'm still
interesting,
gonna play it.
keeps players coming
I wanna
back.
check it out.
And none of that seems to be happening. The most recent thing they released was a total bomb. Just
I
a
saw
little
that,
half-assed
yeah.
Joker content that nobody
'Cause
really
it
wanted.
looks weird.
This
I don't
one
really care
sucks
about
to see
that.
just because we love DC games.
I just wanna
We
play the main
a lot of the
story.
Warner Brother games, but Warner Brothers weirdly enough doubled down on this one. They wanted a live service game. They tried to get it with a game and a property where it doesn't really make sense, and they took a fat loss. They said they still want to continue to try live service games and continue to seemingly make mistakes like this just because they want a piece of that pie. They want their own Fortnite, their own Destiny,
Yeah.
their own whatever, and they're going to do whatever it takes to get it. And
Well-
that's unfortunate, especially with other big successes staring them in the face. Hogwarts Legacy was a
Hogwarts
massive hit for
Legacy.
them, and that wasn't a
I'd
live
love
service
that game.
That was a
It was
regular
all right.
old-fashioned open
I didn't
world
mind
video
watching
game.
her play.
But with Suicide Squad failing, it seems like they got another one in the tank. Just please don't do it with another beloved property. Don't turn Batman into a live service game.
Oh,
Don't turn
God,
Scooby-Doo
don't
into a
do
live
that.
service game. I don't know, man. I can't take this anymore. Now down at number 1,
with him.
we have Tiger Electronics Gizmondo. You remember this thing? I barely
No.
do, but it's now like enshrined in the halls of video game legendary failures. This
What?
thing did garner some
Is
attention
that
at the
thing?
time. It really had potential. It had like an ARM-based processor. A lot of people were thinking it was kind of stacking up to
What the? Yeah, right?
Nintendo.
What
and
is
Sony,
that?
And they spent so much money promoting this thing with all kinds of crazy advertisements, promotional stunts. The Gizmondo
what
was
the hell
slated to
that
be the
thing
next
is.
big gaming handheld. It was shocking just how much money was invested in this thing. There is an insane story behind it too. The guy that was apparently in charge of Tiger Electronics reportedly had like Swedish mafia connections.
Oh, wonderful.
The whole convoluted story behind this thing is absolutely nuts. But ultimately, it ended up with the company being $300 million in debt
Wow.
because this silly device sold less than 25,000 copies. Yes,
Yeah,
after all these
because
flashy product reveals, promotional stunts, advertising,
nobody knew about it.
storefront stuff, press attention.
I didn't
that's
see
it.
any of
25,000
that.
people, if even that, bought this thing. It was not exciting. Nobody really liked it. It was dubbed one of the worst game consoles of all time. Part of the reason was because it released with practically no games. It had like 14 games planned to release in the US and only 8 of them ever came out. And
SSX3,
stinkers
that would have been
one
nice.
way or another. $300
Damn.
million
Good
for
game.
this thing. I mean, just look at this device on screen here. This is crazy. It's
Yeah.
amazing what kind of massive messes people will get themselves into, especially in the world of video games. But that's the point of this list. This is 10 expensive video game failures. Obviously,
That's
some of them aren't
crazy.
really too big of a deal, like
Yeah,
Shenmue, which
Shenmue was
eventually lived
alright.
on,
Yeah.
or Immortals of Avum, which just
Immortals.
sucks because it was an actually good game.
Yeah.
But the crazy stuff like Suicide Squad or
Yeah.
the Gizmondo, those are the ones worth really highlighting, and we want to hear from you guys in the comments what you think. You know, if you like this video and you like talking games with us every day, click
Hell
the like,
yeah.
that's all you gotta do. It really
Subscribe
helps
to
us out.
Game
If
Ranks.
you're new, consider subscribing, maybe hitting that notification bell because we put
Make
out
cool
videos
video game
every
content,
single
guys.
day. But as always, thanks for watching. We'll see you guys next time.
Thank you. To you. Yeah, pretty interesting. They're like, hey, I made this thing, and it should bring us tons of revenue. And then it absolutely bombs. They're like, I don't know what you want. It's like that scene from The Notebook, where it's like, just tell me what you want. She's like, I don't know what I want. Like that. Oh, interesting though.